Cole Rush, we are kicking off 2023 with a very different kind of late screening. We're not talking about a movie today. In fact, we did this once years ago where we talked about a TV series and a movie. We're not talking about a movie today, as I just mentioned, but there was a movie that came out of a TV series sort of called Nathan for You, starring Nathan Fielder, which I was looking it up today. That came out in 2013. I mean, we talked about it more recently than that, but it's been a few years. But I can't believe it's been 10 years since that show came out. And now we have The Rehearsal, which came out on HBO Max, I think last July or thereabouts. And you had been imploring me to watch this show. And I didn't have HBO Max until a Black Friday deal of like 3 months for $2 a month. I'm like, I can't pass that up. And now I couldn't pass up The Rehearsal. And having now watched all 6 episodes of what I consider to be perception and, dare I say, life-altering television, I can only wholeheartedly thank you, and I'm eagerly anticipating this discussion. Cole, welcome. How you doing?
I'm feeling great. I have practiced this interaction at least 10 times, so it's going to go great. Look at behind you. It's Book City back there.
All right. Well, oh, and there goes my camera again. Hold on. I'm gonna cut out this part. All right. Well, let's set the table because, as I mentioned before we started, it's been a while since we talked about Nathan for You. It's been a while since I watched Nathan for You, and my memory is kind of Swiss cheese in the last couple of years. So why don't you fill us in on what was Nathan for You, who is Nathan Fielder, and then we'll get to The Rehearsal.
Yep, I'm going to give you a kind of truncated timeline of my experience with Nathan Fielder. He is a Canadian comedian. He kind of came up with like the Seth Rogans of the world. He notably had a segment called in the show This Hour Has 22 Minutes, which is kind of like the Canadian version of The Daily Show. Then he had a very successful Comedy Central show called Nathan for You, in which he helped struggling business owners improve their business with wacky marketing ideas. For example, a poop-flavored frozen yogurt at a yogurt shop, an 8-minute delivery promise for a pizza shop, or you get a free pizza, but the free pizza is this big. Things like that. But it devolved into other antics like Dumb Starbucks, which made news, and eventually Finding Frances, which I consider to be a absolute masterpiece of comedy and reality filmmaking. After Nathan for You's 4th season and the culminating in Finding Frances, which was the finale, Nathan for You ended. And Nathan Fielder has now been on the production team for various other shows. Notably, he is an executive producer of the show How To with John Wilson on HBO Max. It is exceptional, amazing TV. Highly recommend it. And then, like you said, last July, he launched The Rehearsal, which is a show that ostensibly allows people to rehearse for big moments in their life or things that they have been dreading, so that when the actual event happens, they then have all of this knowledge of having rehearsed it behind them and can take the proper path to the most desirable conclusion. It is a 6-episode mind fuck, and it is, I think, one of the more hilarious shows I've seen in recent memory. And it is also a cringeworthy, uncomfortable experience for many I know who have watched it. And that is what I want from Nathan Fielder. I will also say, we'll probably get into this later, it is a rich and sort of vicious takedown of TV's effect on people and what people are willing to do for the spotlight. And it is also a takedown of the people like Fielder who make those sorts of relationships possible. So there is a lot to unpack in it. And it is, like I said, a 6-episode wild ride that completely surprises at every twist and turn.
I don't know if it's because, I mean, I know HBO Max has become a big deal. Like, I'm the only person I know, I think, who doesn't have a regular monthly paid subscription because I subscribe to all the things. It's that old joke of like, well, cable used to be so expensive, so now we'll just have like 25 channels that add up to more than cable. Yep. I'm definitely in that boat. But I I was unaware of the rehearsal until you had mentioned it to me and you kind of described it to me. I feel like this is the kind of show that should have been part of a larger pop cultural landscape conversation because it is unlike anything I'd ever seen. I think I might have described it to you in a text like it's Willy Wonka meets Andy Kaufman, um, but with Nathan Fielder at the center, who is unlike any personality I've seen. I think we might have talked about this during our Finding Francis conversation or Nathan for You. And if not, we'll definitely get into that here, which is the issue of verity. It is about a guy who is trying to set people up for this reality show, and they are real people. And he goes to all, crazy lengths to help them solve their problems. But as we get deeper into the show becomes more about him and his relationship to the people that he's putting into the show and these situations and how it affects their lives. And so it becomes very introspective. And the very last shot of the series was so weird and like Dark Night of the Soul stuff that I thought it was almost too perfect. And I got that tingle in the back of my brain. How much of Nathan Fielder that we're seeing is him versus wouldn't this just be the perfect ending for my series?
Yep. There's a lot of discussion and kind of analysis in Nathan for You about, which version of Nathan are we getting? And in interviews, he's pretty open about it. And he says, I'm playing a character on Nathan for You, and it is a version of myself that is much less social and much more awkward than I really am. And it's easy to buy into that description because he's a comedian. So you kind of can tell, like, he's probably pretty okay with people, but part of his shtick is not being that way. So that's believable. But what the rehearsal does, which you so definitely pointed out, is makes us ask, like, how in control is he? What exactly is he doing? And what does he want us to think is true? I did a post viewing deep dive after my second watch. I watched it when it first came out religiously, and I watched it last week, one episode a day, kind of in between work here and there. And I was looking up some of the people that are on this show, and they run the spectrum. I think that the first guy, his name is Core Skeet, which is just a fantastic name, who wants to confront a friend about his lie that he has an advanced degree. He is pretty real from what I can tell. But when you get into the second episode and beyond, which is when things really go off the rails, you have this central character of Angela who wants to practice for raising kids in a loving Christian home, nuclear family type of deal. There is a lot of speculation online that she is an actress and has done acting before. She claims that this was not an acting gig, but she wanted to be on TV for, whatever reasons and wanted to practice for having a child. And as interesting as she is, I like what you brought up, which is that towards the end, Nathan starts to analyze his impact on people. And I think that it's easy for him to obscure the truth of the scenario because he is so in control. And he directly grapples with this problem with Angela and with other people. But the last episode, Pretend Daddy, shows that for some of these people who probably can't understand that they're on a reality show, this is very real. And I think the choice to include kids in this was really enlightening for me in particular. And it reminded me of, we talked about this in our Nathan For You chat, how he's like the son of Borat.
Yeah.
It reminded me of a scene in Bruno in which the character Bruno asks parents whose kids are going to act in something if they can do like increasingly crazy stuff to their kids, and all these parents just sign off on it. And this feels like an extension of that, where you have a kid who is supposed to be acting one way or another, but doesn't truly understand what is going on. And when you bring up the topic of verity, that becomes a really interesting wrench in the gears to me, because an adult can understand that they are on reality TV. They can understand that they're trying to come off a certain way, despite what the edit may have you believe. But for a kid, that's not necessarily the truth, at least of a certain age. And we see that come to light very starkly in the series, which I find incredibly interesting.
And that's sort of my central frustration. I love the show, and I don't have any criticisms of it except for the fact that I just don't know. You know,
Yep.
I don't know how much of this is real versus how I almost wish that it were presented as a scripted. I mean, you could put this together into a 3-hour film. I mean, it just rolls one episode right into the other, and it gets crazier and crazier. I almost wish it were presented as, yes, this is a scripted dramedy, but it's presented as a reality show, kind of like Albert Brooks's Real Life, or a number of other kind of things that have experimented with the form of reality TV and movies. But that's the frustration. I will say I watched this with my wife. I think I just said, let's watch the first episode with Core. And this has seriously one of the best opening 5 minutes of any show I've ever seen, because as you sort of alluded to, there's this guy who he hangs out with a group of friends. They're in a bar trivia league, and he's been with them for like a decade or more. And they're all very well credentialed, very well degreed people. Early on in that relationship, he got so swept up in one of the conversations that he started talking about, oh yeah, I've got this degree and that degree and all that. And it just ate at him inside, especially because there would be people in his group acting as friends saying, hey, we know this person, this university is hiring this company or whatever. They're looking for someone with your qualifications to be perfect for it. And he would keep having to come up with lies to them as to, why he didn't apply or why it didn't work out and all this other stuff. So he hears about this show, I guess, and Nathan Fielder comes to his apartment, and there's this awkward banter of like, coming into the door and sitting down in a chair and just kind of talking about stuff. And at one point, Nathan kind of peels back the curtain and says, look, I've rehearsed this entire conversation with an actor playing you in a replica of your apartment. And as he's talking, it's like a Usual Suspects kind of reveal as we see the apartment. I think it's been a while, like a couple weeks since I watched it, but I feel like we might pull back from the apartment to reveal the set, and then we see him coming in the door and meeting the actor who looks very much like Core. And then he's got spreadsheets and diagrams, and he's got a great like laptop that he carries around with like the suspender harness, so he can be everywhere controlling everything for every contingency. The bar that they spend time in, he is so obsessed with getting every possibility right, like in this multiverse of possibilities, that he has a warehouse on which he has created an exact, precise replica of the bar, inside and out, working taps, I imagine, kitchen. He hires actors to come and create bar atmosphere. They have a working pizza oven, I believe, or maybe they microwave, I can't remember. But the point is, they spend days, possibly weeks, going through every scenario so that Core is ready. But then the day they even have an actress playing the one member of the group that he is most intimidated, most concerned that might flip out on him. They hire an actress to play her. They need to get a sense of what that reaction might be like, if there's actually going to be any kind of danger there. So they have this actress pose as a journalist to go meet the real person in a park for an interview to kind of sort things out. And as the show goes on, that's just like the first level of the first episode. As the show goes on, we find that he hires people to play himself, people to play other versions of other actors playing characters. It just gets so Inception-y that it's bonkers. And somewhere in the middle of this, he starts wondering, well, who the hell am I? At one point, Angela is supposed to be looking for someone to share her life with and co-parent, and the one guy that she's kind of interested in after a couple of blind dates, he turns out to be a complete flake. Yes, he's religious, but he's also a pothead and completely irresponsible and has no interest in sticking around to help feed the baby at 3 a.m. or comfort him.
He also crashed his Scion at 100 miles per hour.
That's right, I forgot that detail. But Nathan steps in to be the mock father in this relationship, and that's when things really start blowing up. I also forgot to mention that part of the experiment, the second episode really just opens up the entire season. I think they have one other, like a side rehearsal that they do.
Yep.
which
Patrick.
is also really gripping. But at a certain point, Nathan realizes that he has to focus on this whole family thing, all this side business. If he's gonna make this work and be a good father and make Angela a good mother, he has to dedicate everything to the family. But in the middle of this, he's like, well, I used to be married and things didn't work out, and I've always wondered what it would be like to be a father, and do I have what it takes? Does anybody? So it just gets really strange, but very touching in odd ways. They tackle child actors, they tackle religion, they go all out. I think this is a great show for people who are seriously thinking about becoming parents. I think everybody needs to watch this.
Well, there you go. I can't speak to having any kids, but I watch it and I go, "Oh, that must be exactly what it's like." Um
It's well, it's the thing is, it's not exactly. I kind of lost my train of thought, even though I was rambling. But I do want to mention that big, as going from episode 2 through 6 and focusing on this family project, what they do is they hire a succession of child actors. Like is it every week, every 2 weeks, they age 3 years?
I can't
Um,
remember what the rate is.
Right, but they have, and they do it seamlessly. So they'll have an infant, and it looks really strange the first time you see it. You're like, what is going on? There's a person sneaking in through a ladder to the second-story window and taking a baby out of the room. It's because they're doing a swap in the middle of the night for, the 3-month-old goes to like the 1-year-old to the 3-year-old or whatever it is. But they keep swapping out these kids. So the idea is for the experiment to go from birth essentially to age 18. And how do you deal with all the different ages? And there's a very important cheat about halfway through that, which we'll get into in a bit. But what I'm saying is, no, the show doesn't quite prepare you for what it's like to have a kid. But what it does do is present these different scenarios that you really have to think about before you start a family. How well do I know my partner? How well are we on the same page as far as these fundamental things like finance, religion, the ways in which you're going to bring up the child? What happens when the going gets really rough and you have a fight? Like, how do you resolve these things? And it's almost like weird reality TV pre-marriage counseling.
Yep. Oh, it really is. It's to watch for me, the relationship between Nathan and Angela is one of the most fascinating parts of the show. Um, because even though she knows that he is in a position of power, being the producer and the director and all these things of the show, um, she's pretty remarkably able to stand up for what she believes in. And listen, I'm the first person to denounce religion of any sort. Don't love it, don't love what it represents. I'm one of those, if you're privately spiritual and practicing, that's good for you if it brings you peace. But I admire Angela's sort of stand your ground attitude when it comes to Nathan, because it leads into that exploration of what does a situation like this do to people. So you have the reality of being in a couple or co-parenting, but then you also have the reality of this is a TV show we are filming, and Nathan is the Willy Wonka of this proverbial factory. They even make that analogy directly, and which I love, by the way, in episode 1. But Angela knows what she wants, and in a way it can give way to the rehearsal and the exploration of what TV means to people and what being watched 24/7 means to people. Because what I seem to think as I watch her more and more is that she knows what she wants from raising a kid. She knows what she wants from raising a family. There are things she could learn. How much can you actually learn from a rehearsal like this, I guess, is one question. But she kind of knows what she wants her path to be. So I kind of quickly abandon well, what is the rehearsal going to do for her? And quickly move over to well, what does this mean then that she still continues to do it? And that starts to give way to all these interesting questions. And I think that I have to give props to Nathan to some degree, because I think he knows that it would be best for the show for him to insert himself. And I think he knows how like laden with issues that is. But as we saw in Nathan For You and Finding Francis and this, he is willing to make himself the butt of every joke, as uncomfortable as he needs to be, to get a laugh and to get the content. And I think that in an age when so many people will try to do the bare minimum to get the most, he takes the opposite approach and he says, what's the most I can do to make this good? And the result is a show like this. And it's just absolutely fascinating and remarkable to me that we even have the rehearsal. A lot of the discourse surrounding the show was, is this exploitation? Is this awful? Is this bad? Is this problematic? And those are questions that came up in Nathan For You too. You know, is he exploiting these people? In a way, yes, but many of them remember their time on the show fondly if you look at the interviews afterwards. Whereas the rehearsal basically takes that question and says, like, what does this sort of situation do to people? And what does it mean for both sides, the creator and the people involved? And within that, like you said, you have these nuggets of truth that people can draw from in their real life. And that's sort of the ultimate viewing experience for me. It's sort of self-analytical in a way, but it can also be consumed kind of as is for entertainment, which I think is what a lot of people did. I had one friend who basically said, I wish it was just one rehearsal every episode like Nathan For You was. And I was like, that did not ring true for me. I was like, what this became is so much bigger than a show that just lets a guy rehearse for a conversation with a trivia teammate. You know, it's not the same vibe. It's not just a 20-minute comedy show. This feels like a document.
Right. I think perhaps the best kind of example is I watched select episodes of Nathan For You with my wife. She couldn't stand it because it was, I mean, she appreciated what it was, but it just made her cringe so much. Whereas I lean into that stuff. I watched way more of Nathan For You than she did. In this show, we watched the entire 6 episodes together. It wasn't cringe, it was just fascinating. Because of just the technical marvel of it all. I mean, at one point, I think like episode 3, it's revealed that in order to help himself pull off the illusion of, you know, or get into the mindset of how his kid is going to perceive him, he has all the mirrors in the house installed with the digital mirrors, essentially, that whenever he looks into it, he sees a version of himself that is aged up to the appropriate age that he would be if his kid was, you know, 16, he'd be like in his 50s or whatever it is. So he's got the gray hair and the wrinkles. And at one point, when I think it's in the last episode, when he is really wrestling with the effect of this show on the boy who played the 6-year-old version of himself, he is talking to the boy's single mother, and there's some kind of, I'll say mildly tense. It's tense for me because I was like listening to her answers. Essentially, it comes out that the kid was not a child actor. The mom had sort of seized upon opportunity to get him involved in this show, and perhaps had not had that training of like, this is what make-believe is, like you might with other young child actors. So it really messed with the kid's head. So Nathan decided to take on the role of her. So at one point he looks in the mirror and he looks like a woman, and he's got like the nail polish on and everything, even down to her wardrobe. I almost can't, if people are listening to this or watching this and they haven't watched the rehearsal, I apologize. Stop this right now and go watch it. This is mostly for people who've kind of been through the show, I think. But I watched this and then I look at, you know, the Oscar nominations came out, you know, this week. And I'm struggling to think of one film. I haven't seen them all, and I know about most of them. But I can't think of any movie from 2022 that I'm even aware of that had this kind of craftsmanship, performance, imagination, and asked the really big questions, the kind of stuff that we really should look to art and entertainment for.
The answer is Marcel the Shell. And I say that
Okay.
only half jokingly. It is absolutely a phenomenal movie. And It actually it ticks all those boxes.
All right,
I'm
I've
gonna
not
take
watched
away
it
the
yet. I
half
gotta.
joking and say it has the level of craftsmanship, acting, performance, writing, and it does ask big questions. They aren't the same questions as Nathan Fielder asks. But it is a positively wonderful film, completely underrated, if you ask me. Deals with viral internet fame and family and loss and grief, and it is remarkable. Aaron and I saw it
It
at the
got
Music
nominated
Box.
for best animation. So
Oh, did
yeah,
it really? Um,
wait, I'm pretty sure it did. Like, I'll double check that, but yeah.
well, I hope it wins, because it was one of my favorites all year, along with I liked Everything Everywhere as well. Um, Also, this is completely off the beaten path, but Aaron and I watched Matilda on Netflix. Holy crap. That new movie is amazing. Peak camp, love it.
All
Um,
right.
so those are my three recommendations of the year: Matilda, Marcel, and Everything Everywhere All at Once. Um,
Marcel the Shell of Shoes on is actually one of the five nominees for best
okay,
animated
well,
feature. Yeah.
fingers crossed for it. Did like a Disney or Pixar come out this year?
A few. Turning Red was nominated from
Well,
Disney, and then Puss in Boots: The Last Wish from DreamWorks, which
I've heard that's quite good.
it is excellent. I didn't actually review it or talk about it. I just watched it with my youngest, and we were both like completely surprised by how great that movie is.
Well, there you go. I doubt that Marcel will beat out those tough competitors, but
I
this is
honestly, I
my.
think Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, from what I've heard, is the one to beat.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I've heard good things. But yeah, this is my unabashed recommendation for Marcel the Shell. One of my favorite pieces of media I watched all year. Um, but yeah, so I I'm not like you in that I don't watch a lot of movies. Which is like we only have two series based on that, predicated on that idea, right? Um, but TV is like my jam, you know. I actually just wrote a newsletter this week about my irritation with um there seems to be this sort of prevailing attitude that like film and TV are like the best mediums. And I think there's clearly a case to be made, but there are so many stories that take place in video games and books and like on stage and other mediums that are just as good. Um, but a lot of people seem to use that sort of as a defense for why they won't consume stories another way, when I think a lot of the times, not always, it can just be laziness or fear to try something new. Um,
In sort of. I mean, I think, and this is probably a whole other discussion. I know Roger Ebert famously had a whole big diatribe against video games, or questioning them as art. My only issue with video games is if you're talking about something like The Last of Us, which is they've turned into a TV
that's
show,
what the newsletter was about.
right? The problem there is that the experience of the game changes based on the player,
Mhm.
whereas in a movie or a TV show or even a book, the user or the readers, the consumer's experience is different based on one solid state piece of content.
Yep.
On top of that, when you're asking the average person who has a family and is working jobs, you might get them to go see Avengers because it's 3 hours long and everyone's talking about it. You're not going to get them to say, oh, you got to play this 16-hour video game in order to get the full thrust of the story. That's just not going to work.
Yep. And that I completely understand. I also made similar points or identical ones when I was
Sorry,
writing about it.
didn't mean to step on your
No,
piece.
I mean, these are great points. And I tried to acknowledge in the piece, like, this is my bias coming through too, right? Like, I am privileged in that I have the ability to afford video games, much less the time to play them. Like, this is a thing that is true. My direct gripe was less about people liking movies and TV, which I very much enjoy myself, and more about the reasons you prefer them, right? Because I
Hmm.
think a lot of people will try to say it's the highest art form, when in fact it is just the easiest to consume. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I consume a ton of TV, and a lot of it people would consider to be trash. It's
Are you watching MILF Island?
I am not watching MILF Manor, no.
Or is it
But
MILF Manor? That's right.
how
I
predictable, you're thinking of 30
sorry.
Rock. How predictable was that twist though? But yeah, it's I like to consume stories in pretty much any form, and I'm never going to try to tell somebody that like one is the highest art form and therefore I will not try the others. And that was sort of where my gripe came from. And I don't think a lot of people do that, but I think that it can sometimes, like I said, be a bit of a shield or a defense against unwillingness to try or inability to.
Right.
So again, I can't fault anybody for not being able to engage with a certain medium for a completely valid reason. That's just how it goes. But that said, once in a while, there's, a TV show like The Rehearsal that comes around, and I watch it and I'm like, this could not have existed in any other format. You mentioned that, it could have been a 3-hour movie, and I think that those are kind of interchangeable in this scenario specifically. But watching it week to week and kind of being within the cultural zeitgeist of it was absolutely fascinating, because it's kind of an interesting approach. Like, Fielder has a fandom, of which I count myself one of the many, but it's not like a huge IP is coming out. So you have this weird intersection of loyal fans coming to see what he's done and people who are seeing it for the first time and don't have the context of Nathan For You or How To with John Wilson or This Hour Has 22 Minutes even. And what you get is just this 6-hour long message that contains so many different subplots and subpoints. And I think for anybody to watch it and come away with nothing would be pretty much impossible. It's not something that begs to be watched just as content to consume without an opinion. And that's what I really appreciate about this, is it's sort of interactive in that you have to ask yourself some sort of questions while you're watching this. You can't I can't imagine sitting there watching it passively and having no thoughts on it. And when TV can do that, to me, it is much more interesting, because it's like you said, it's a solid state piece of media, but when you watch it, you come out with something different than I come out with, and that's what generates the discussion. And it's much more authentic to me to have TV like that than to have something that tries to manufacture virality on its own.
Right. I mean, it does walk or straddle and possibly even cross over that line of being something that is a very well put together, well produced experiment that is meant to educate and entertain the audience, and something that is sort of winky comedy. I mean, in that last episode, as I mentioned, when he's trying to figure out what's going on with this little boy, he retraces, he does a do-over, or does several do-overs with a specific interaction he had with the boy, where they're kind of wrestling around, and I think the kid says, "I love you, Daddy." And initially he said, "I love you too," if I have that correct, or acknowledged it. But then he was thinking, well, given that this seems to be one of the key points at which we were bonded mistakenly, because this boy who's growing up without a father has now latched on to me as his father figure, but that can't be, because I'm not going to be in his life after the show's over. He tries to go back to that moment and see what would happen what if I was distant with him, which creates its own sort of problems that could mess a kid up. And then we get into a montage of well, what if I use an actor who, because I think he went and got the boy who played the next age up from him, the 9-year-old, to come dress as the 6-year-old, but even that got its own set of weird complications. So he said, well, maybe I need an adult actor, maybe I'll try it with a dummy. So it's this minute-long montage of this wrestling kind of scenario playing out with different conclusions. And you can almost see by the time he's wrestling with the dummy, I'm thinking, it's a really neat idea, because if you're doing a science experiment, you want to try and test as many variables as possible. The other thing is, I can see this being a laugh line, kind of like in the Actor episode where he's out in LA and he's, kind of set up this fake acting studio for the Fielder method. At one point, he impersonates one of his students to sit in on the class, and you see him walk in with the exact kind of blonde hair and a jean jacket suit of one of the guys, and no socks and sneakers or something. And just the way the camera's positioned, it reminded me of something out of Sacha Baron Cohen or The Office. Okay, this is he's sticking out like a sore thumb, this is really funny and you gotta laugh. I thought about that, but then I thought, well, I'm not laughing because I'm more fascinated with where he's going to go with this character. What is he trying to accomplish here?
Yep. And he ends up like going to the guy's apartment and like trying to live there. And it's yeah, I think what's the big turning point for me is when he starts to like insert himself into these rehearsals as people who went through the show, it becomes so much more convoluted and interesting. Um, and it's also a point where some of that truth comes into question, right? Because one of the actors, the one who he impersonates, is very clearly uncomfortable with the Fielder method as it is so branded.
Is
And
basically finding someone, latching onto them and trying to absorb their personality and
yep,
a very intimate stalker situation. Yeah.
yeah, precisely. And um Fielder uses this as a way to like very clearly tell the viewer that you should be uncomfortable with this. And that's when my trust, quote unquote, starts to waver. And I'm not saying I completely buy into every single thing that happens until then, but it's when it seems like he wants me to start asking the questions, which then in turn makes me question, well, what previous 4 episodes do I need to look back on with a new set of eyes? Because this actor is, besides this actor, all the other ones seem really engaged with this theory. And like there's another thing it brings up is kind of like the craziness of acting classes and how few credentials you really have to like claim to be a teacher of these things. Um, and I'm sort of happy with the fact that he doesn't try to answer all these questions. I think he provides options. It's kind of like a multiple choice type thing, but he's content to let the questions float out there. This isn't a definitive conclusion by any means. And it goes back to what I said earlier. There's sort of an interactive nature to it where you come out of it thinking, I need to chew on this again. And the second time I watched it, number one, I laughed even more this time. But number two, I was constantly questioning every little bit of it because I remembered it all. And I think that there's an element of the rehearsal where I don't know what it does differently from Nathan for you, but like there's not as much of a pastiche of comedy over it, and it feels realer to me. I'm not saying that I believe it any more or less, but the way it's edited, shot, and written and everything makes it feel more like reality because they kind of hide in the corners and make it seem like they're hidden camera filming these people at lunch, even though full well like they know the cameras are there, they sign the release, whatever. But the way it's structured makes it feel more like a reality show than Nathan for You was. And I know that's intentional, but I find it very interesting.
Well, the lunch thing is very interesting. I assume you're talking about the blind dates that
Yep.
Angela went on.
Which are just hilarious in their own right.
They are, but I wonder about that because she kind of breaks it to the one guy that she ends up taking an interest to, that she's part of a show and all that. While we get to see that moment, and I know in some cases, I think it might have even been in the acting class, when they have to sign the releases afterwards. So sometimes, and I'm no expert on show business, reality TV, but I have heard that they'll get the footage with the unsuspecting people and then intercept them right before they go away and say, by the way, you've been on TV this whole time. Do you consent to this? And so that's why a lot of times you'll see blurred faces, or you'll hear, oh, they didn't want to partake in this, or they didn't want this released, because they won't sign the release. That's why they call it a release. So yeah, it's what I like about it is, and one of the reasons I think it causes these bigger meta questions in me. Your one friend said, I wish it was just, a different rehearsal every episode. That's what I expected from the show, but it takes on a life of its own. So at the end of episode 2, when they seem to be just getting into this Angela character and the kids and how is this all going to work out, I'm like, how are they going to wrap this up in 3 minutes? And it's like, oh, they're going to continue into the next episode. It's a 2-parter. Wait, it's a 3-parter. 4? Oh, this is the whole series now.
Yep.
And that's why I question the reality of it, because I think a mind like Nathan Fielder, which I can only imagine what it's like inside there, could conceive of, I'm going to do a fictitious show that's billed as a reality show that starts as one thing, quickly becomes another, and then becomes 50 other things. I could also buy into the reality that this is sort of organic, maybe nudged along here and there, because it certainly takes a lot of time and effort to build a bar or a replica apartment or an 82-foot hallway that leads out of the fake bar onto the street with signage to invite people in because he'd gotten a fucking liquor license to open this fake bar. You know, it's just, it's like the X-Files. I want to believe.
Yep. And, you know, if you choose to take the more optimistic reading of this, like you said, with nudges came about organically, I think it speaks volumes to the nature of Fielder as a creator, because I think that a lot of times creators will get in their own way, and it can really result in a story being tepid. I think a lot of times studios and other stakeholders can get involved with that process too. But if this was all organic to some degree, and he saw those opportunities to make it better by inserting himself or doing another rehearsal in between, you know, whatever happened, I think it's just a wonderful sort of like picture of him as what kind of comedian he wants to be. There is not a, like, I don't know, it's hard to describe, because if you haven't seen the show, like, you don't really know who Fielder is or what he's about. But even after watching it, you still have those same questions. But I still think at the end of the day, he's going to serve whatever story he thinks is best. And for somebody to have that much control and that much restraint, and like I mentioned earlier, the ability to kind of insert yourself even though it's uncomfortable, is something so far-fetched to me because of how much studios and executives have their grubby hands in things these days. So that's where my skepticism comes from, is I want to believe, like you said, that Fielder is like the one driving all this and the creator, and is kind of subjecting himself to whatever story emerges. But on the other hand, I believe that there is an episode order of 6, and you've got to produce them, and you got to make something happen. And I don't know where on that spectrum this sits. But even as I'm saying it, I wonder whether I care. You know, I've watched it twice now, and I think this is amazing and entertaining every time. And I try to walk that fine line with media, because I know a lot of people who, when I try to engage them on like a philosophical or analytical level with media, their eyes kind of go dead. And, you know, they just don't really want to have that discussion. They just want to enjoy something and then move on to the next thing. And then I have friends who are like, they only want to watch stuff that makes them think. And this is one of those things, like I said, that it's going to make you think. And I want to engage with that, but I don't necessarily care all that much about the truthfulness of it all. Because I think the questions it asks are just as important, if not more so, than is this real? And it's kind of similar to the point where, you know, you talk to somebody about how a fictional story changed their life because they relate to the characters and stuff. The impact of something can still be massive, despite it not necessarily being real. That's why imagination exists in the first place, you know? And that's what I really appreciate about the rehearsal, is you've got this thing, you don't know whether it's true, and that's part of the glory of it to me.
You know, I watch a lot of reality TV. A lot of it in the last couple of years centered around the 90 Days TV universe. Are you familiar with that?
I am.
90 Day Fiance, 90 Days the Other Way, 90 Days Pillow Talk. Yeah. Anyhow, I actually had this conversation with my wife the other night, because we both watched these shows. And I was explaining to her that there's no such thing as entertainment that I can consume without thinking very heavily about it. Even brainless stuff. I love watching stuff that engages, that is supposed to engage my mind, as you put it, stuff that makes me think, and that's its purpose. but I don't have a filter there. So when I'm watching a show like, yes, I'm going to cop to it, 1,000-Pound Best Friends, which is an actual show. We were watching an episode last week, and I noticed that the four friends were having a conversation in the kitchen. And this happens all the time in reality TV, and it's a fun little game. But if there's a microwave clock in the scene, watch it. And watch how the four friends will be having what seems to be a 5-minute conversation, but the clock will go forwards and backwards during the different cuts. So you're left to wonder, was this an actual conversation? Was it one that they did multiple takes for? Did the editors piece together a conversation to fashion a storyline based on something that had nothing to do with anything else? They were just able to find the words in that moment. Or was like one cutaway where it's like 12:05, whereas the rest of the conversation happened at 2 p.m. Was it just because one character had a good reaction that captured that character's feeling in the moment of the actual conversation, but they didn't have that exact frame, so they took it from this other place? These are the things that I think about when I'm watching shows like 1,000-Pound Best Friends. And that's one of the things I love about The Rehearsal, is it makes you wonder about this. Angela is a comedy character. She has that kind of cliched story of like she was young, there's probably some abuse, she got into drugs, like heavy drugs, like acid and stuff, and then she found Jesus, and now she's like so far into Christianity that she's into numerology, and she finds the one other guy on a dating app who's even more into numerology than her. It's a comedy character, but as we go through the show, we start to figure out more about her as an actual person. We find out more about the people playing her kids as actual people. We come to find out, and this is the cheat that I mentioned earlier, at one point when Nathan goes to LA for like a week or two to do this acting school and do some other research for the show, when he comes back, his son, Adam, is now 16 years old, I believe, or 15, something like that. And he comes in and Nathan is like, "Hey, how's it going?" And the kid's like, "Fine." And then, but there's something wrong with that emotion. And Nathan goes to talk to the kid. He breaks character. And he says, "Look, I want you to talk to me as, you as the actor, not you as my son, even though it's in the contract, you're not supposed to do that." What was, how would you, if you hadn't seen me in what amounts to, I think something like 9 years had passed, could have been 3 weeks or something like that.
Yeah.
How would you feel? And the kid's like, I would not be happy to see you. We'd have some problems. So he's like, "Can we just redo that?" And so Nathan comes home and the kid like basically tells him off and stomps off to his room, leading into the rest of the episode. They've got serious problems between them. And Nathan is freaking out because he lost all of that time. And that's something that, whether you are a father or a mother who's abandoned your kid and you have regrets, or if you're just a parent who, the cliche is true, so hang on to it. And part of the cliche is that no one ever believes it when you tell this to them. When you have kids, time moves incredibly fast. And 1 minute they're 3 years old and you're the king of their world, lovely play buddy. The next they're 12 or 13 or 18 and they want nothing to do with you. Even if there's still love there, they're off becoming their own people. And you always wonder, I wish I'd spent more time with them. I wish I'd done this. I wish I'd done that. So it's a cheat, and I could see it coming a mile away, but it's also a sweet moment. There's a scene at the playground where the 16-year-old kid is hanging out with all of his friends, like they're getting high and drinking. And Nathan kind of wanders into this field and he's looking at his son, and his son kind of nods to him, and he goes down this slide, like one of those concealed tube slides. And out the other end comes the 6-year-old version of the boy from before he left. And he gets the chance. He wonkes himself the chance to go back and get that 9 years again. It's wish fulfillment. It is a cheat, but again, this is the kind of thing I think it beautifully illustrates something that if you are starting a family, or if you're thinking about becoming a parent, or even just getting into a long-term serious relationship, thinking about what attention costs you. And that's in that 30 minutes is the perfect illustration of that.
Yeah, this is, the more you talk about it, the more I think if and when I become a parent, this is a show that I'll want to revisit from time to time. And as much as some of this stuff is like maybe not dark, but just like heavy, a lot of it is uplifting.
Yeah.
My my favorite scene in the entire thing is they Nathan does the sketch of Dr. Fart with the kid, and then Angela confronts him and she goes, he's eating feces, and she's like really pissed about it. And I just love the scene because Nathan then goes and he's like, well, you have to escalate the sketch. Do you know a lot about sketch comedy? And um these little
we
moments,
should point out he's not eating feces.
not actual
Eating
feces.
he's the little boy is like 3, or maybe it's the 6-year-old at the time. They're playing a doctor game, and it's a chocolate bar that Nathan's pretending
Yes,
to eat his own
correct.
food, and the kid loves it.
And the bit is hilarious, number one. But it gives rise to this sort of like, well, you talk about parenting, it also gives rise to these questions about relationships, because I know and have known, and I'm sure you know or have known many people who, like, you meet them and you kind of wonder like what's going on there, like between those two, like, you sense that there's love there, but there's something kind of like an undercurrent that you're not quite sure. And with Nathan and Angela, they kind of bring that to the most awkward forefront that they can. Um, my personal favorite interaction between them is when Nathan almost breaks and basically asks her, well, can you just make me a list of everything that is satanic? Because I'm gonna go to the store and bring back oranges, and you're gonna be like, well, orange peels are satanic. Um, and I can relate to that because they're like, even being with my partner for however many years now, we've been married for 3, together for over 6. I know you've got a little bit of time on us, but still, there are little things you find out about them that maybe aren't as awkward or severe as that, but just kind of make you laugh and think like we are still growing and learning to understand each other as people. And as terrible as the depiction is between Nathan and Angela, and hard to watch for some people probably, um, it's also nice because it's an indication that like no matter how different you are as people, you can still learn a lot about each other. And that's something you can apply not just to your romantic relationships, but to your friendships as well. And it's a lesson that I try to take too, is like when you learn something about somebody, yeah, accept it at face value, but like also appreciate that like this is new information you're getting about a person. And um it can be any number of things. It can be funny, it can be enlightening, it can make your bond stronger. And there's a lot that just like learning a factoid about a person can do. And I think that this just flips that on its head and says like, sometimes you are kind of friends with somebody and you learn something about them, and you grow apart a little bit because of that fact, and then another fact comes and you grow apart a little more. So it's just a cool analysis of relationships too, and what people will do to get what they want. Robin is a great example in this show, um where like they're sitting on the couch, him and Angela, this is her potential suitor, and he he literally just says to her, so I'm like a pretty attractive person. And you're learning things about him, and the edit is clearly made to make you think that Robin is a low life dolt who doesn't deserve anything. um it certainly depicts him that way, at least. But it's just another of those interesting tidbits, and it also, I guess, it's a lesson in like how something so small can teach you about somebody. But then it's also like how a tiny thing can paint your perception of somebody possibly incorrectly. Uh, that was a long ramble about a lot of things, but it's one of the aspects of the show I adore is, you'll share one bit of information and your perception of something completely changes.
Well, that's I think a good way to start to wind this down. That blind date, the only reason that Robin was his name, does not end up with Angela is because of Nathan. Nathan goes in the car with him back to his apartment, and that's when things start to come out about like the ridiculous degree of numerology, about his hostile, volatile relationship with his roommate, about the whole thing about he crashed the car. We learn this before Angela learns anything about it. Whereas if Nathan hadn't been there, it's almost like a warning against dating app culture, because you see someone attractive, you get their bio, you get the best version of them that they want to put out there. And if you think, oh, we've made a connection, we can make this work. I'm a single mom, I'm looking for someone, you're a Christian, I'm a Christian. But that information is going to come out. and you're going to have to deal with it. It's just, a mercy that they found out about it pretty much on night one instead of night, 1001. Because that would have been some really devastating stuff for Angela and also for, baby Adam at that point. But yeah, there's so much about this. There's that Netflix documentary a few years ago called The Social Dilemma. I don't know if you watched that, but it's like that, and then this are great insights into how media shapes reality as we perceive it, reality as we accept it, and actually reality as we know it in a lot of cases.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I love The Social Dilemma, by the way. It is mostly the reason I deleted many of my social networking apps. So here we are.
Excellent. Well, hopefully you out there watching will not delete YouTube, or at least not this channel from your YouTube feed. Excuse me, I'm recovering from a bit of a cough. But Cole, thank you very much for recommending The Rehearsal and introducing me to Nathan Fielder. Not in real life, that would be amazing, but his work certainly. Do you have any final thoughts on The Rehearsal?
No, I think we covered a whole lot of ground. I will say, if anybody watching, including you, Ian, enjoys The Rehearsal, your next journey should be How To with John Wilson, which is a very different format, a little less uncomfortable to watch, but no less entertaining by any stretch of the imagination. Absolutely wonderful show. Fielder is not in it, but he executive produces. And I think you will be delighted if you watch it.
Challenge accepted. All right.
Oh, I do have one more thing to plug, actually.
Oh, yeah.
I wrote a piece about people's perceptions towards animation, in which you so gratefully, I'm grateful to you. You participated in it. And many of your answers were featured because predictably they were excellent and well thought out. So I don't know when it will go live yet, sometime after this is on YouTube, but check tor.com or my website or my Twitter and you'll be able to see it.
Well, and also, if you're watching this in the future, after the piece is published, there will be a link down below.
There you go.
Again, if you're watching
hello
this
from the future.
Immediately after it goes up, it won't be there. But yeah, yes, hello from the future, exactly. Cool. Well, thank you very much, Cole. I'm flattered. It's always fun to help out in your literary writing about endeavors. But yeah, I don't know what we're talking about next month. I think we've got a list hammered out, but I frankly forgot what's on it. So it'll be a surprise and an adventure. Until then, thank you very much, Cole. Everybody check out Cole's stuff. There'll be links down below. Check out The Rehearsal and Nathan for you and how we work. What is it?
How To with John Wilson.
How To with John Wilson. Okay, do that. I'm going to do that. Until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thanks very much. Oh, like and subscribe and all that business, and take care.